Hello and welcome to another video from the only source of information that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse, but actually enjoy it. And today's video is going to be the next in our interviews series with expats. Expats being those who have left their homeland to travel to another country and take up residence. Last week we talked to our regular MC, Toledo, and this week we're going to be talking to a friend of ours, a subscriber named Shannon, who has moved from the U.S. to Hungary. So, and Toledo is with us, so y'all might want to say hello, Toledo.
Hello, Toledo.
Hey, everybody. Yep.
Shannon, that's Shannon. But a first question, and I guess I need to shut this thing so I can see what my text document says. Okay, first off, what was your previous location and what is your current location, Shannon?
My previous location was I lived in West Texas, almost in the center of the state, in a town called Abilene. And I moved from there to rural Hungary, about 3 hours south and to the west of Budapest, in December of 2017.
Yeah, and when you made the move, you actually discussed it with me beforehand. I don't know why, but you were asking what I thought about it, and I said, "Well, I mean, anywhere you move that's the empire is there, so I don't really, I don't know that that's going to benefit you or hurt you." And you said, well, I've already set my mind to it. And you moved and you enjoyed the move. So what was your reason for immigrating out of the U.S.?
Well, it was multifaceted, but the two primary reasons. One was because shortly after Trump was elected and took office, I really had falsely great hopes that he was actually going to finally be his own man, and we have a president that was actually going to do what was right, not what he was told to do. And in April of 2017, my fears were soon realized that he was just another yes man like all the ones before him, because he was just carrying on the same agenda. It doesn't really matter whether it was a Republican or a Democrat. They're all still just going down that same pathway. And so that really left me with a bad feeling. And also, I had recently been hit with some major cost of living increases in my house payment and my insurance and taxes, because of just, everything's going up. And it didn't take, and I just got to realizing that, no matter what you do, you're always going to be behind the eight ball in the U.S. because your pensions are not keeping up with the cost of living increases. And I thought about it, and I had actually been thinking about it for several years about leaving the U.S. because as an expat in some countries, the cost of living is lower. The trade-off for that is if you're a working person, the wages are lower too, and you could also encounter a problem of a language barrier if you go to a lot of countries. But since I'm retired and that's not a problem for me, I don't need to work. It really was not a problem for me to come here, as far as from my own mental thought processes, because I was a military brat when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. So I'm used to packing up and moving, and so it was just like another move to me.
Yeah, well, I'm not a political person, and when people start talking about, when I saw the political system changing, I got worried, and I thought this is not good, and I left. And I've never concerned myself with the political system because I've always kind of known it was a rigged deal, and that every single president that came in was going to start wars with people. They were going to make the laws more oppressive. They were going to, during their reign, incomes would go down, cost of living would go up. So it's never bothered me. But I remember when Obama became president, I thought, wow, we've got a black president in the most racist white nation on earth. This may be different. We may get something different. But then at the end of his reign, nothing had changed. You know, more oppressive laws, more wars, same thing, less money, more cost of living. And so it's kind of, I already knew if Obama couldn't change anything, crooked casino operators certainly couldn't change anything. And sure enough, he got in, he talked a good show, but everything was the same. Still bombing people for no reason. Still,
Yeah.
the economy's getting worse. Still, everything is just like the typical pattern that we've had for, what is it, 250 years.
Yeah.
So, anyways, you moved for all those reasons. Do you feel like your move accomplished the goals that you had hoped to
Yes.
accomplish?
Yes, absolutely. My cost of living has gone down significantly from the standpoint of housing costs because I bought an old derelict farm in a farming village, and I paid for the house and the property in a barn, about the equivalent of 23,000 US dollars, and paid cash for it. And so I have no house payment. My property taxes is really, actually, there's no property tax, but what there is they do have a tax on, if you have a motor vehicle, you have to pay a tax on it every year. And last year was the first year I had to pay that because last year I bought a car and it was about $70. And that's the only tax. But how they get you here in Hungary, if you buy stuff, they have what's called a value added tax, which is about like sales tax in the US. But most of the Hungarian government's income is derived from the VAT, or the value added tax. And there is a tax on people who make certain incomes. Now the average person, most of these people in the village here don't make enough money to have to really worry about an income tax, but they do get you on, if you buy what's considered to be luxury goods, or things that are beyond food.
Yeah. Well, that's probably this all leading into the next question, which is what are the pros and cons of living outside of the U.S. in your current location? So going from the U.S. to Hungary, what are some of the benefits that you've experienced, and what are some of the things that maybe you don't really like?
Well, the biggest pros, I guess, about coming here is, now I'm keeping a significant part of the money that I was getting in pensions in the U.S. that I was having to pay out in taxes and insurances and this, that, and the other. I'm getting to keep every month after I pay my food and my utility bills. I'm keeping probably 60%, 70% of the money that I had when I was living in the US, with everything being the way it was. I was probably keeping 30% of the money that I got after everybody got their hand in it. So that, allows me to do more with the money that I have left over. And what was the other part of the question?
Pros and cons,
Oh,
things
the
you like and
cons.
things you don't like.
Well, I tell you what, I'm really, really disappointed in Hungary in one thing, and this is a joke, so don't take it serious. I really miss Taco Bueno and Bojangles chicken.
And I remember you saying something about the hash browns that you
Yeah,
used to
and the
get it.
hash browns at the grocery store. But other than that, I have no regrets of coming here, and
So when you
I
weigh
love it here. I
weigh the
love it.
good against the bad, obviously you're the happy there, but would you recommend it to others? Do you think other people would be happy doing what you did?
It's really going to depend upon the person. If you're a working person and you're in a profession that you're really raking in the dough, like IT or something or another, or you've got a skilled trade, you won't make that kind of money here in Hungary because the cost of living is lower, the wages are lower here. So, say a job that you might get 30,000 a year for in the U.S., because the cost of living is so much lower, you might only make 12,000 a year in that same job. It's really
Hmm.
going to depend upon what kind of a demand it is. It's probably not going to be as much of a good choice for a younger person with a family, but for a retiree or a couple who have already worked and they're in a situation where they don't need the money, or if you've gotten a lot of money saved up and you don't need to worry about working, this could be a great place.
Well, I was just looking at the next question I got on my little list here. It says, did you have a plan? What steps did you take beforehand? How did you do it? Do you have a long-term plan regarding living elsewhere? So I guess really, when I was talking to you, were you still working or were you already retired when we
I
first?
was already retired. I had to take a disability pension in 2010 because of a non-work related car accident that I was involved in back in 2007. A guy talking on his cell phone decided that his conversation was more important than watching the road, and I was in a bad accident that messed up my neck and my back, and so so
Well, I
my
really,
plan was
I
my
love,
plan
absolutely
was
love talking on the phone. My phone has a TV set and everything on it, so I have a little mount. I can actually watch TV while I'm driving.
well, excellent. Well, maybe that's what that guy was doing. Maybe he's because he had a Ford Super Duty crew cab. Maybe he was watching his TV instead of watching the road.
Oh my God, that's a big truck. Well, I mean, when you first got put into retirement, were the wheels turning, like you were thinking about what you want to do with the rest of your life, or
Uh,
did you try to make things work in the U.S. and just realize, oh my God, I can't afford to live here anymore? How did that all happen?
well, I knew I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the cost of living is very high there for several reasons. A lot of people are moving there from up north, from New York, Connecticut, and they moved down there, and the population has exploded while I was living there. It went from about 300,000 people when I moved there in 1998 to when I left in 2010. The population was about 450,000. That much growth, and it was almost all people coming from up north. So they'd have these elections, and I'd hear these people complaining about the high taxes up north, and then they have these bond elections, and they vote for the same exact things. These Taj Mahal schools and these elaborate buildings and stuff, and I'm just like, you're kind of spiting yourself. You get away from what was oppressing you up north, and then you vote for the same exact policies and politicians as what you had up north. So
Yeah, I
it
can't.
was in change. So I knew that I couldn't afford to stay there in Raleigh, and I moved to Tennessee from there, and I stayed there about 6 years. And I loved it in Tennessee, but I was living about 35 miles from uh, a major town, and with my health being as it was getting to be a problem driving back and forth a couple of times a month to medical treatment. And so that, and the area where I lived at, there was a problem with meth labs, and people's homes were getting broken into and stuff like that. It was getting to be a high crime area, so I just decided to leave. So I moved back to my hometown, uh, Abilene, Texas, and I stayed there for about 2.5 years. But I really wasn't happy there. I thought I would be before I got there, but it was not the town that I grew up in. It had changed a lot from when I left.
Yeah, I kind of, my whole thing is that I want to leave, but I don't really have any place I want to go. And so all my life I've been wanting to have some kind of a RV, and so that's probably what's going to happen. I've got my truck, and I'm trying to get it ready to just put
Yeah,
a camper in it and just leave. And it's more or less, I don't believe that there's any place that's any better or worse than where I am. And it's got to be hit and miss. But I just feel like if the house I'm in has wheels, and I go somewhere and find
yeah.
out it's as bad as this place, I can go on and try somewhere else.
Well, and I did look at I considered, the possibility of leaving, where I was at in Texas and moving somewhere else. But every place that I would look at, there was usually one of two problems. It was too close to a major population center, or the cost of living was going to be high because there was some kind of an attraction that caused the real estate prices to be outrageous. I had looked at places like Montana, looked at places like South Dakota, I looked at places like Utah, and even Arizona, but there was just a problem with all those places at one or another. But I had been looking, I don't know, since probably, I want to say probably about 2012, I had been looking about the possibility of moving out of the country. And I had considered places like Panama and Costa Rica, Ecuador, places like Bulgaria and Romania and Hungary, Austria and Spain. And some of the places were really attractive from the standpoint of the weather, but with the good weather or the more moderate climate, then you paid more. And then you come to a place like Hungary where you have more of a Northern European type winters that you have a winter that lasts a full 6 months, because of the relationship we are with, the Arctic Circle up here. I mean, this is probably closer to being like in New York State, as far as the same altitude or latitude, I guess is the word I'm
Well, where
looking.
you live, you pretty much free to just, if you want, you can go check out all those other countries, right? I mean,
Yeah, I could go. Well, you could go until this COVID-19 mess. The Schengen zone did have open borders between all of the main countries here in Europe, and you could drive across them with no passport control or anything. But because of the health situation, a lot of the countries have border crossing restrictions unless you've got a COVID-19 certificate saying that you were tested within 48, 72 hours and that it was clean. And so now it's not so easy, but hopefully in a year or so, it's going to change and the borders will reopen. Because I mean, I'm like a day's drive away from Venice, Italy. If I wanted to go there, I could go to Rome, I could go to Vienna, I could go to Bavaria to go to the the Oktoberfest there in Munich, or I could go to, there's so many places here in Europe that I can just get in my car and drive there. And, you can stay as long as you want. There's a really good road network here for the cars. And if you don't have a car, you can get on a train. Europe has really good rail transportation. I mean, you could literally, when the borders were open, you could leave here, go to Budapest and catch the trains and stuff and go all the way across France and then go under the English Channel in the tunnel and come out there in the UK if you wanted to, and never have to get behind the wheel of a car.
well, I've got subscribers in other countries, and they would talk about just freely traveling to Italy and Spain, and I think, how in the world, because over here, for us to travel to another country is just, that's a huge undertaking. But over there, it's like all of Europe is like the size of the U.S.
Yeah,
So each of the countries is like the size of a state. I was looking
yeah,
at a friend of mine who was in England who was traveling all the time, and England, the closest thing to the size of England that we have over here is Alabama. Alabama is almost the same amount of square miles as England, so you can actually just drive around and get a feel for the people, and if you felt like it, sell your house and move to another country.
yeah. I could, although
Do you do?
I really don't see me doing that because here is probably within the three or four most affordable places in Europe to buy property. I could do a lot of traveling and still keep my base right here and just, go. And then, hey, I could buy a little trailer to go behind my car if I wanted to, they have a lot of these B&B or Airbnb type places that you can go and stay. I mean, so there's a lot of opportunities, to travel. I mean, I really don't see selling this place and going to a more expensive place like Germany or the UK, because property in those places is just outrageously priced. I mean, it's way over what it should be.
Well, you said before you weren't ever going back to the U.S. Would you come back to the U.S. just for a visit? Do you have any family or friends that you'd like to come see?
I've got family and some friends there, but honestly, all of them that I want to talk to are on Skype, so I can talk to them that way. And other than that, I really don't have any reason to come back. If I had to leave Hungary, if something were to happen and the political climate would change to where that it was no longer a good place to be, I would possibly go to some place like Costa Rica or Panama, but I would just know that my cost of living would be a lot higher.
All right. So, well, since you moved there, have you changed at all? Like I mean, some things are obvious, like getting used to the money or the language. But I mean, as a person, have you changed?
Yeah, I have. I have become more slow paced and more relaxed about things, because over here in Hungary, uh, they have two speeds, uh, indistinguishable from dead and slow. And if you're in a big hurry here, you are just going to be frustrated. You're going to want to pull your hair out, because they just do not get in a hurry to do something, and they're not good for returning emails or voicemails in a punctual time. I've actually was thinking the other day about after we had talked, and I remember one time that I'd sent somebody an email about something. I don't even remember what it was about now. And I got a response from them like 4 months later, and I didn't even remember sending them the email or what it was about. So when they sent me the deal, I was looking at them like, huh? What? I'd forgotten about it. But as long as you come to Hungary, or for that matter, any expat country, with the expectation that things are not going to be the same as they were back home, you're going to be a lot happier. If you've got to have everything exactly the way it was back home, and you expect everybody to act like they did back home, you're going to fail as an expat. And there's actually been a couple of articles I read that said that most expats from the U.S. will fail in less than 12 months if they cannot come to the grip that they're no longer in the fast-paced society like they left the U.S.
Yeah. Well, what about the other things? Like your language? Have you learned how to speak Hungarian? Can people still tell you're American when you're talking to
Oh
them?
yeah,
Or
they could tell even if I didn't say anything, just because my clothes are still differently. Because I've still got a lot of my American clothes, but Hungarian is a very hard language to learn. It and Finnish and Estonian are kind of related languages that came from the Uralic part of Russia, or what was Russia, the Soviet Union back before it was the Soviet Union. And they were a nomadic people, and the Magyars wound up coming here to this part of Europe and settling. And but the language deal has really not been that big of a deal, because a lot of the younger people in school take a foreign language like English, German. So you can usually, if you go into a business and they have some younger people working there, there's usually somebody in there that can speak at least intermediate level English. And if you go to a place and nobody speaks English, most of the time you can still get by, as long as you can say hello and thank you and understand the numbers and just basic things.
well, I'll tell you what. I don't think English is an easy language to learn. I remember
It's
when I
not.
was born and my parents were talking. I did not have a clue what they were talking about. It just sounded like gibberish. But eventually, like when I was 2 years old, I was kind of had most of it figured out. But that's a long time to have to study a language. 2 years.
Well, I know a British couple that's been here for 15 years, and they're not any further along than I am. But in all honesty, they haven't made any effort.
Well, I mean, the thing, just like with Ala Toledo was saying last week, no matter where you go, people are speaking English. It's hard to get motivated to speak a different language when
Yeah,
there's always somebody there that
yeah,
can
and
interpret.
that's another thing that I was just going to say. That now that you mention it, a lot of the younger people want to practice their English, so they won't let you try to practice your very basic level Hungarian. So if it's, but anyway, it's not a problem. Um, it's not been a problem for me anyway.
Well, like I said, people see when you walk in before you even open your mouth, they know you're an American. So here's the deal. Do these people have presumptions about you before they even get to know you? Like you're an American and all Americans are a certain way, so they treat you like an American?
Well, I think Hungarians, and for that matter, most other people from the world, think that all Americans and all British people are rich, and so they think that, oh, this guy, he's from America, or this woman, she's from the UK. They're filthy rich. Well, some of them may be, and some of them may not be. Some of them are not much better off than the average Hungarians, and they came here because their pension money goes a lot further here. So, but I think most Hungarians that can speak a little bit of English after they talk to you will generally realize, that you're just like them. You just want to live your life. You want to be left alone, and you want to, just do things, to I'm trying to think of the word, to have a comfort of life or quality of life, just like they do. And if you take the politicians and the politics and all that government mess out of it, I think throughout most of the world, most people are just ordinary. They just want to live their life and not be bothered to cause anybody else any trouble.
Yeah, when I was in the military, we traveled all over the world because I was in the Navy, so our ship would land at different ports. And I had grown up where you're watching all these movies. The Nazis are the bad guys, and they're or the Soviets are the bad guys, and they're just oppressive and evil, and they're um, imperialist. And so the first real eye opener I had going to another country is that everyone is scared of the U.S. because the U.S. is perceived as Nazis or oppressors. It's like there are no military bases of any country in any other country, but the U.S. has military bases in every country on earth.
Oh yeah,
How and not only that, but I mean, the U.S. is the only country. Almost every war that's ever been started was actually started by, well, Anglo-American policies,
yeah,
and the U.S. is the only country to ever drop nuclear bombs on civilians.
yeah,
So that we've got that reputation that
yeah,
all the bad guys in our movies, to other people, the U.S. is those bad guys. But
yeah,
you would hear people, you could see it in their eyes that they really were suspicious of you. But like you say, you get to knowing them, and then they judge you as a person and not as a member of a race or a
yeah,
nation.
yeah. Speaking of the American military, where I live at right now is less than 3 miles from the runway of a closed down former Hungarian Air Force base. And during the Bosnian conflict deal that the U.S. was involved in, the U.S. military had leased this base from the Hungarian government and were conducting their bombing raids from right here at the edge of town. I didn't even realize that place was a base till I had already bought this place, but it's closed down now. So, I mean, there's no military activity there at all. And then the U.S. military has Air Force detachment in the northwest of Hungary, getting closer to the Austrian border. There's a base there. I know there's been at least 2 U.S. military bases here. But most of the people here really, I think once they realize, that you're just an ordinary person who just wants to live your life and do the kinds of things they do, they pretty much let their fears down, as long as you're not suspicious or sneaky or asking too many personal questions, and, I don't ask personal questions or get into any kind of political conversations with them at all about the Hungarian government, because, it would be just like them talking about American politics. I don't have any right as an outsider to criticize their government, and I would probably take offense in most cases if they were to be talking junk about the U.S. government.
Well, you've told me before that they're surprised that anybody would come from the U.S. to move to Hungary.
Yeah,
Like,
they
why
are.
would you move from the free nation into Hungary?
Yeah,
Because they're still used to when they were part of the Soviet Union.
yeah,
But you've straightened them out. You've told them,
yeah.
well, look, there's not
It's
that
not.
much difference.
Yeah, I just told them. I said, well, Eastern Europe has thrown off the yoke of communism, and it seems like that Western Europe and America are doing everything they can to embrace the yoke of communism. And once you tell them that and they think about it, yeah, they can see that.
Yeah, well, I was like, it's like pretty much every nation on earth from the very beginning. As soon as Adam and Eve were cast out of the Garden of Eden, they moved into a system of oppression. And so, really, when you see these wars against oppressors, it's basically just wars where one country is a little bit more oppressive than the others, and so that's the excuse. But they're really, in a Bible, 1 John chapter 5 verse 19, it says Satan is the god of civilization. Doesn't say he's the god of America or the god of the Nazis or the god of the Soviet Union, just the god of civilization. But currently, this is the capital. Washington, D.C. is basically the military capital of civilization. So
Yeah,
obviously, the closer you get to that, the more oppressed you're going to be, the more danger you're going to be in.
yeah, yeah. That's true.
Okay, well, here's another question. Do you think that events in the USA are or will have an effect on life in the country where you're currently residing? Like
Sadly,
when the president makes a declaration, we're going to go ahead and make a imaginary disease that everybody has to get inoculated from. Do you think that would get to Hungary?
it has gotten to Hungary if you're talking about the COVID-19 thing, but
Mm-hmm.
just in general, anytime decisions happen in the U.S., like NATO always winds up getting involved in it, and then all of the European countries get involved in it. And most of the time, I don't know whether they're coerced into going along with the U.S. agenda or whether they're just blindly follow. I'm really not sure, but it's kind of like you're walking down the street and there's this dog laying out there on the side, on a sidewalk, under a tree. And if you leave him alone, more than likely, he's probably not going to bother you unless he's really, really a mean dog. But when you see that dog and you walk by them and you try to kick him every day, eventually that dog's gonna react. And I think that the U.S. military keeps, and just the U.S. foreign policy in general, they try to antagonize people into compliance with the U.S. Policies that they want them to adhere to. And if you don't go along with it, you could suffer repercussions. Or if you do go along with it and you wind up being on the short end of the stick, if there's a war and your team winds up being defeated, you could suffer. So there's really no place on the earth hardly that what happens in the U.S. doesn't have repercussions globally.
Well, you know me, I have no opinion about whether like narcotics or alcohol or cigarettes are, I mean, I know that cigarettes are bad for you, and I know that probably all that stuff in excess is bad for you. But it's like you can't make a law against what you put in your body, right? And yet they made laws against of all things, law against marijuana. It's basically, I've tried it. I've tried cigarettes. I don't see much of a difference. It's smoke. People who use it eventually get sick and die. Um, I don't know that smoking cigarettes makes people evil or that smoking marijuana, but they made it a law that if you smoke marijuana, you go to prison, or if you sell marijuana, you go to prison. I thought, how could a country make such a silly, arbitrary law against something that's no different than cigarettes or alcohol? And yet, every country on earth followed suit. And it's like, why would all of these nations, the ones who are supposedly our allies, the ones who are enemies, they all make these laws against something that isn't anybody's business? And then, of course, you look at it and you say, well, maybe maybe the government knows something I don't know. Maybe this marijuana does make people become, criminals. I don't know. But now they're making it like a law. You have to get an injection against this pandemic, and everybody earthwide is following suit. They're all wearing masks, and you think that this is impossible. The U.S. can't possibly make the people in other countries wear a mask, and yet they are. The allies of the U.S. are wearing masks. The enemies of the U.S. are wearing masks. It makes no sense.
Well, as far as that topic is concerned, I think there's another time to talk about that. But just in general, the U.S. foreign policy is going to come out of the boardrooms of the major banks and the major Wall Street firms. And if there's profit to be made from a policy that they want, they're going to figure out a way to get the U.S. military to be the enforcer of it, whether that be, the wars that have been fought in the Middle East against the poppy plant, that's used to turn that pretty little flower into morphine and heroin and stuff like that. And so there's that. And then, the other is the policies towards central banks. And if you notice that most of the countries that the U.S. seems to have a problem with are the only countries that don't have a central bank. And that would be Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, and up until recently, Libya, and I'm not even sure, but what Syria that has a central bank. But it just seems like they have a problem with those people because they're not part of the global good old boy network as far as banking and loaning money in areas. So those four countries come to mind as being on the hit list. And then countries that don't go along with the U.S. policies towards Russia and China seem to find herself on the sanctions list. So there's agendas at play that some of we do know and a lot of we don't know that go on behind closed doors. But all you need to know is there's profit going to be made by somebody, or the U.S. wouldn't be pushing.
Here's the deal. It's like every single president that gets into office, people get a lot of hope or a lot of fear that this guy is really going to mess things up or he's going to save the world. And I mean, they're passionate about this. I mean, the U.S. currently is seemingly like right on the verge of going to war with itself over whether or not Donald Trump gets to remain the emperor. Yeah. But they change these guys out every 4 to 8 years, and they never
changes.
They don't change the script writers. You don't want to. The spokes model isn't the problem. It's the guys that are writing the scripts for the spokes model. And if you look at like the Bible scripturally, James chapter 4 verse 4, 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verses 4, 1 John chapter 5 and verse 19, they all say that people who are friends of civilization are friends of Satan and enemies of God. Satan is the ruler of civilization. All this concept runs throughout the Bible. How people who break God's natural law to build cities and create law codes that are not natural law are destroying our world. They're all under the power of Satan. And so, electing a new spokesmodel cannot fix that until Christ returns and replaces Satan, who is the originator of all the scripts. Nothing can change. Now, from a biblical perspective, what does that have anything to do with your decision to move out of the U.S.?
Well, I will say this: I won't sit here and say there was a biblical scripture that was driving me to leave, but it was just I had this. Even when I was living in Tennessee back around 2012, I was thinking, I just had this compelling thought that, you really need to think about getting out of the U.S. and moving somewhere else in the world. And it was there, and it had been in the back of my mind, and I just kind of would ignore it. But it really hit me in, like I told you, in April of 2017. I really just had this overwhelming sense that if you're going to get out, you need to get out this year, because it's not going to be too much longer that you may not be able to get out, or if you can get out, you may not be able to go where you want to go. If you're going to do something, now is the time to do it. And when I have failed to heed my inner conscience or the little messages that I would get to myself, I almost always live to regret not listening to my inner voice.
Yeah, well, a lot of the scriptures that are come to mankind come through the churches, so they don't sound like the original writers intended. Jesus was asked, "What's going to be a sign of your return?" And Jesus said, "Well, first off, it's not going to be wars. It's not going to be famine. It's not going to be pestilence. It's not going to be earthquakes. Those things have been happening from the beginning. What it's going to be is sign in the sun and the moon and the stars. But there will be false prophets who tell you about earthquakes and famine and pestilence." Yeah. So, but the thing is, when we get it in English, our English Bibles completely word it inappropriately. I mean, if you go back and read it, you can see that what it actually says in English better matches what I'm telling you. Mm-hmm. But the way the church is presented is that as we get closer and closer to the end, there will be an increase in earthquakes and wars and all these things. Mm-hmm. Well, even though that concept is wrong, you can look at history from a secular point of view or from a scriptural point of view, and it's just a fact that each and every culture that has ruled the earth has imploded on itself. I mean, right. If you go back and look in the Bible, you see where Egypt ruled the world and the Israelites were slaves to Egypt, and they eventually escaped. But then they were replaced by the Assyrians. The Assyrian Empire grew, and it grew to a point where it could no longer support itself, and it imploded. And then Phoenicia, Greece, Rome, England, the U.S., so all of these things.
Anyway, my sense of dread was not a sense of something necessarily happening to the United States, but it was just thinking about food and food shortages and resources becoming hard to get, and inflationary cost of living increases, which, like as I told you earlier, I saw this massive hike in my house payment. It jumped almost $200 a month in one fell swoop. And I'm just like, I can't be taking hits like this, because 2 or 3 more of these, and it'll be getting my whole entire Social Security check. I mean, all of it. And
yeah, well, so I just saw the way it's always worked historically. Like when Egypt was an empire, it grew and it grew and it grew. Well, they were building these huge cities, and you have to bring resources into the city. You have to have a sewage system, water system, but you also have to have food and clothing and dyes and fuel for lamps. that's all got to be brought in. So the bigger the empire gets, the farther you have to go to acquire these things. And
Right.
back in the day when people are toting this stuff on camels and donkeys, they were kind of limited to how far they could go and still efficiently bring in the resources. So,
Yeah.
once you get too big, things, of course, the politicians are demanding more and more taxes. No one can pay them. Entire civilization implodes. Well, then you move over to another one where there's plenty of agriculture, plenty of resources, and you do the same thing. Well, we're in a global society now where the U.S. can actually send out 18 wheelers and oil tankers and things like that to acquire this. But still, that has its limits as well. And we're getting close to that. So, regardless of what our governments are going to do, or what the religions are going to do, or the financial advisors are going to do, you just get to a point where there's no way to continue providing the resources necessary to support a great big pile of people in one spot.
Yeah.
So, and that's going on, and it's gonna run its course, and once again, civilization will collapse, just like all of the other civilizations collapsed. Only this time, we're heading to that final collapse. And
Yeah.
so, the best thing to do is to position yourself somewhere where you have a lot of those resources locally. In other words, you don't have to go thousands of miles to get.
Exactly. See, and that's the thing. Like here, where I'm at right now, is a farming community. There's a lot of locally grown vegetable crops, produce, fruits, grapes, hogs, chickens, goats, sheep, and all that kind of stuff are raised right here. And most of the food that I buy in the local grocery stores comes from within 50 miles of here. If it's something that was not factory processed, almost all of it comes within 50 miles of here. And they have like farmers markets around here you can go to, and you can get fresh vegetables every week. I mean, it's better than anything in the supermarket, and it's not GMO, and it's it's good stuff. It's got good flavor, and it's a good value for the money. And that's the thing, when you're living in the middle of a big, like you just said, a big giant city or a big civilization. And then when resources get scarcer and scarcer because there's more people or there's a shortage of something, then the prices are going to continue to escalate. Well, here in Hungary, because they were under communism and they went through two world wars here, these people here have done without for so long that they learned how to provide their own food. And even if, the government was crooked, or if there was, some kind of a problem, they pretty much were self-reliant because they knew they weren't going to get a bailout from the government. That if they didn't do it, they were going to starve.
Yeah. Well, where I live, I thought, well, I'm going to make a permaculture forest here because I knew I wasn't going to be able to just keep doing agriculture. I couldn't just, that's
Yeah.
a lot of work. But I got a lot of fruit trees out here, and it's not even enough just for me. But you can believe that if the food runs out, all of my neighbors are going to be over here.
Okay.
I probably got 55 gallons of oranges this year. That
Mm-hmm.
means that every neighbor I have could get one orange.
Yeah.
And what are they going to contribute? Nothing. Because,
Yep.
in fact, they've made it against the law for people to even have fruit trees. If you have fruit trees, you have to pick all the fruit before it hits the ground, or your whatever they call it, those people that run the different neighborhoods will come in there and
Oh, the
find
homeowners association. Oh yeah. See, I
and
have like here.
chicken.
I have grapes. I have apple trees, some cherry, blackberry, and a couple other fruit trees that grow right here on my property, or branches of overhang. And I can get more fruit than I could possibly ever eat. And a lot of people around here have stuff, so they take their excess and they take it to the farmers market and they sell it. And but like you said, if there was something to happen, then you'd have a overrunning of people from the big cities will come, and they would pick everything clean in no time.
Yeah,
What
I
would be
honestly,
enough for you and me for a year, they would pillage it and it'd be gone in less than an hour.
yeah, I honestly feel like I have enough stuff here that I could support myself indefinitely. I've got chickens, they lay eggs, I could get meat, I could hunt. And if my neighbor was set up like me, then the two of us could really benefit from one another. And if his neighbor, but the way it works is none of my neighbors have anything. I'm here
Yeah.
by myself trying to do this, and everybody hates my guts anyway. So there wouldn't be any, they would have no problem with coming in here and killing me, or at least stripping my trees and beating me up.
Yeah.
So there's no way, if you can get to a community like where you are, where everybody is making something,
Yeah.
uh, that would
Well,
probably be
and that's the thing
situation.
that's really good here. I've got a German neighbor that lives across the street. That him and his Hungarian wife, they bring me fruit out of and vegetables out of their yard every year. And I've got a couple other neighbors that bring me stuff, and sometimes they bring me so much stuff I can't even do anything with it because they bring me a bunch of squash or stuff, or these huge cucumbers or other stuff, and I mean, I can't eat it up fast as it before it goes bad. So I'll just take, a few pieces what I know I can eat, and I'm telling them to give the rest of it to somebody else because I don't want to take something and it go to waste.
Yeah, yeah, that's the way I feel too. I was growing up, we had everything, and a lot of it just did go to waste because we didn't. We would tell our friends and family that we had tons of figs, or we had tons of pears, or whatever, any
Yeah,
fruit that anything in the garden. We'd have just rows and rows of corn. We couldn't eat all of that, or okra.
yeah,
You would have to pick it and bring it to them, and then if you went to their house a week later, you'd find it in their trash because they didn't feel like processing it.
yeah,
So, we just we've
yeah,
learned over time to grow what you need, and if you grow more than you need, let it hit the ground.
yeah,
Don't even bother giving it to anybody.
yeah. Well, that's a problem, but I mean, I've got a lot of food and stuff stored up here. But I was thinking about it one day. I'm like, if this village, if everybody here wasn't, growing their own gardens and stuff, the food that I have here would feed everybody in this village for maybe one day, and that's a year's supply of food. So
Yeah,
if you've got a bunch of people like that around you, you're going to have a hard time keeping on to your food and your resources.
yeah. Well, I tell you what, I've had so many bad memories at this house that even if everything got good, I would still feel like leaving because over the years, I had neighbors attack me, the government attacked me, my my wife attacked me until
Yeah,
I'm living in it. I have so many bad memories here, just horror stories
yeah,
that I just don't want to be here anymore. And
yeah,
so, that's my motivation is that I'm in a place I don't want to be. And it
yeah,
doesn't really matter what else is out there or if it's any better. I just don't want to be here.
yeah.
So, I mean, we're pretty much at the end of all the questions I had written down. Have you got anything you want to add in conclusion about whether what a person should do to prepare to leave, or what a person should consider as they're making this decision, or anything? Have you got anything you want to add to what we've
Yeah,
said about so
I'm
far?
going to say right now that it's going to be hard for a lot of people to make a big change like this because of the fact, of the border situation because of this pandemic stuff. But even if that wasn't the case, I think we're getting down, to very close to the end in times. And it's going to get harder and harder for people, especially to go internationally. And there are places that you can still go, don't get me wrong, but it's going to be more limited and you're going to probably have a less choice than you would have had when I made this choice. Um, but if you can't leave the U.S., what you need to do is you need to look at where you're at and where your big population centers are and where the hordes are that are liable to outflow from the cities and places. And you want to try to find a place, if you can, to buy or to rent. And you may have to rent it. You may not be able to buy it, depending on your resources. But you want to find a place that's off the beaten path, that's as far away from a major interstate highway as you can. And you want to look at places that have decent growing seasons And there's actually a book, if you will allow me to plug a book, and an author there for the U.S. There is a guy who's he's a retired Marine Corps pilot, I think, and his name is Joel Skousen, and he has wrote a book about places in the U.S. to consider for relocation. And I don't remember the exact name of it, but the guy's name is Joel Skousen, and he has a website. And you can go just search his name, Joel Skousen, and he's an author. He's wrote several books, and he could definitely could give you, pointers on places to and places not to consider if you're going to relocate, and you have to stay in the U.S.
Yeah, I honestly think that if you're going to make a decision, one of the biggest things you need to think about is the necessary resources. If you're in a,
Yeah,
say, in a population center, when things shut down, that instantly becomes uninhabitable
yeah,
because there's
exactly.
no water, no sewage. You're in a life and death situation at that point. If you're way out in the country, away from all of that, there's a little bit of lag time. I mean, obviously, we've become dependent on things like uh, electricity and water
Yeah,
and the internet
yeah,
and telephone, those kinds of things. But at the same time, it's not a life and death situation the minute things start breaking down if you're away from people.
right. Well, the thing of it is you want to look at places that have longer growing seasons. If you're inclined to garden, you want to look at places that have natural availability of water, like streams or rivers or groundwater that's easily accessible if you have to dig a well. You want to look at places that get a lot of year-round sunlight as much as you can. Um, those are going to be better places for a lot of people. But the other downside of that is other people are going to be looking for them kind of places too. And sometimes you might want to take a place that maybe the growing season is not quite as good in a colder climate, and that might increase your chances of not winding up with a bunch of bad neighbors.
Well, I'm sure a lot of thought went into you making your decision to move to Hungary. I think that's the big thing. If you
Yeah,
really want to bug out or you really want to migrate, you need to just spend some time right now thinking
yeah.
about what you need to do because on the day when things get bad, it's too late.
It's going to be too late, and that's the thing. I pondered this, move and this choice. I had been thinking about it for several years, even before finally I just said, "All right, that's it. I'm out here." I had been thinking about it, and you want to look at places that, if you do leave the U.S., you want to look at places where there's a chance that you'll be able to obtain food. You're going to want to look at places where you can get water, obviously, and you're going to want to look at places to where you can stand the climates, whether it be too hot, whether it be extremely frigid. Moving to some place like Helsinki, Finland, is probably not going to be a good choice for 99% of the people out there. But at the same time, moving to sub-Saharan Africa is not going to be a good choice for you either, because it's going to be too hot and there's going to be a very difficult time finding water and food. So
Uh-huh.
you have to weigh each thing against, and you also have to look at your own capabilities. If you're like I am, handicapped to where you can't physically do the things that you used to could do when you're younger, then that's going to limit some of your choices too, of what you're going to do.
Hmm. Well, look, I think we've discussed pretty much everything. I really want to thank you for participating and ask that if anybody else out there has left their country of their origin to move somewhere else, let me know. We'll interview you if you're willing to. So far, we haven't had anybody willing to get in front of the camera, but next week we got Sandra from The Adventures of Dave and Sandra, which is another YouTube channel. And I know for a fact that they are very used to being in front of a camera, and we may have to do two separate videos for what they have to talk about. So that's next week. Um, Pretty much that's it. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for participating. Thank you, Ala Toledo,
You're
for
welcome.
managing things in the background. And as always, I hope you enjoyed it. And if you don't want to survive, don't listen to us.